I've had engine failures going across the ocean. I think that would probably be...
What does that mean? For people who don't fly planes or just passengers of planes, if I'm in a plane and the engine fails going across the ocean, what should I be concerned about?
Flight time today is going to be 5 hours and 28 minutes. Should be a mostly nice flight for us across the ocean. On arrival at the Hawaiian Islands, beautiful day there. Mostly clear skies. Temperature is 86 degrees Fahrenheit. That's 28 degrees Celsius. We do appreciate your business. Thanks for trusting us with your travels. We'll talk to you airborne. For now, sit back, relax, enjoy your flight with us to
airplane mode.
But when you fly, you get in there, you get on the runway, you push the power up, and you decide to put the nose in the air. And as long as you keep climbing, you're going to find the sun. No matter what, I get to find the sun. I just have to keep climbing.
Ramy Guirgis.
Finally here.
Finally here.
Yes.
I am Corinne Guirgis, and...
Are we related?
I don't know, do we look alike?
I don't know.
We might look alike.
People have said yes and said no. You're more dad, I'm more mom.
Right, that's true. But as I get older, I'm a little more mom.
Okay.
We've kind of fused.
Yeah.
I'd say we're siblings.
Yeah.
It is my great honor and my great privilege to introduce the world and my lovely audience, anybody who's watching this, to my older brother, Ramy Guirgis. Ramy, could you introduce yourself?
Sure.
Tell people a little bit about who you are.
I'm a brother, obviously. I'm a son. I'm not a father. I don't intend to be either. But yeah, I'm an airline pilot. I'm a realtor. Those who are subscribers to your channel, hopefully they know. I don't actually even know what your handle is.
Corinne the Coach.
Corinne the Coach. So my last name is not Coach, by the way. So despite the
Ramy Coach.
Yeah, right.
Ramy is a coach
in
his own regard and has coached me through many, many life obstacles and journeys. And
let's be fair, we both learned from each other, and we're both only here because we've learned from each other. But honestly, I'm someone who's just genuinely interested in life and human beings. I think the most interesting thing in the world is to have a chance to talk to interesting people, whether they be online or with you. So
I wonder if that's genetic.
Yeah.
That's like my whole purpose here.
It seems like that we both love that. We're both interested in people.
Yeah.
Right.
I brought Ramy on the channel today because in addition to being one of the youngest captains at one of the biggest international airlines in the world, an incredible success story. He has not even hit 40 years of age.
Yet.
Who has had many obstacles in this life and found his way to pivot and to adapt, to fly the plane even when it looks like it's crashing. You're one of my biggest inspirations.
Oh, thank you. Well, it's likewise.
I feel that you have so much to share with people about overcoming limiting beliefs, about living for yourself and in your truth.
Still learning. Hopefully I never stop learning.
I don't think you will.
Yeah.
I think you remain open to what life has in store.
Yeah.
And even in the short time since I've moved to Los Angeles, which was just 3 years ago.
Yeah, crazy.
I've seen and experienced your growth and applied it in my own growth. And
hopefully that's just a little part of why you're here then today.
It's a huge part of why I'm here. It's a huge part of why I'm here. I want to just ask you a few little quick questions that I think the people are going to want to know.
I'm bracing.
Favorite place you've ever flown?
Malaga, Spain.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Favorite cockpit snack or go-to cockpit snack?
Oh, savory mix.
Favorite childhood memory, with or without me?
Oh, no, it was with you. It was probably when I really pitched to mom and dad that we all go to Disney World in the middle of the summer. And you did have a meltdown, and that was not my favorite childhood memory, but I remember we were like all watching a parade come through and as a family, and it was kind of the last big vacation that I remember taking before everyone's life started to happen around them.
Best thing or most valuable thing you've learned from mom and dad?
Don't be a victim. That, you know, they went through a lot of adversity to get to where they're at, and they didn't know anything about the countries they were going to and didn't speak the language, and they never let that slow them down. This one, yeah.
Los Angeles.
Yeah.
Is that your forever home?
Yeah, and my family's all around me again. Didn't start that way, but somehow it ended up that way. Oh, someone that you can talk normal with. Yeah, that you could be yourself with. Yeah, women have that power for some reason. Yeah, so someone that you can actually be your vulnerable self with. That's the best thing about having a sister.
To steal your line, we have been interviewing each other in some way, shape, or form for many years. Right. You're my older brother, 6 years older, which is a lot of extra wisdom, a lot of extra time.
A lot of time to make more mistakes.
That's true too. And yeah, I mean, aren't we all professionals at that? Yeah. But it's really cool because for me, I have lived my whole life with this person, two people, Sharif the same, that I can tap into who have just always been steps ahead in life experience. That doesn't mean I listened.
Right.
I think as you get older, the age difference becomes less significant. But also, I feel that when we were really age apart, you know, I mean, there was a time when, let's say, for example, I'm 10 or 11 and you're 16. Right. You know, what do those two people have in common? I'm not looking at you as a role model but I think you're looking at yourself as a role model.
Yeah, as I got older, it seemed that way. Younger, you know, I was not a great role model.
Why do you say that? Why do you say that?
Just causing chaos. I just caused chaos at school. I caused chaos at home. I like to bully you and Sharif.
You did bully. Right. You did bully.
I don't know who got the brunt of the bullying. I don't know if it was you or Sharif.
So it was a generational bullying because what would happen is you would bully Sharif, and then Sharif needed somebody to bully. Right.
What do they say? Shit rolls. Are we allowed to swear in this interview? Okay, I think they say shit rolls downhill.
Shit rolls downhill.
That's kind of how it was. Yeah.
One of the reasons why we're here is because over the course of our adult lives, we've come to a place where your life experience has become so valuable to me as not just a brother, but also a peer. Right. And I like to think that even there are times when we're in conversation where my life experience has become valuable. Sure. And I think as adults, we've had a really awesome chance to get to know each other in a completely different way. Right. Because there were years where we were apart. Right. You know, after you left college and I was still in high school and et cetera, and you moved to the States and did all these things. So in this time of life, in this chapter or phase of life where we've both, you know, thankfully landed in the same city in Los Angeles, within 5 miles from each other, there's a real opportunity to almost catch up on these years that are sort of missing from our relationship where you were developing as a person and I was developing as a person separately. Yes. And here we are, like you said, kind of coming into this phase of closeness where I'm getting to know your journey and your experience. Yeah. And it's an incredible one. Right. It really is. Yeah. An incredible one filled with self-discovery, filled with accomplishments, filled with ups and downs.
Difficult questions. Yeah, absolutely.
And also realizing that we have a lot more in common than I ever knew that we had in common as a kid. Yeah. The main reason why we're here is because growing up, I always felt like some type of other. Like my brothers were on the straight and narrow. Sure. Successful, doing well in school, clear about what they were going to do for their careers, even if it changes. We'll talk about that. And I was kind of a lost sort of black sheep kind of thing. Sure.
It's funny though. It's the stories that we tell ourselves, because you felt that way, and what you didn't realize is that me going through ahead of you always felt that way. And so, if I had put one word as the theme to my life, it has been difference. That from day one, I still remember, we did not necessarily going to a well-off private school. We're not necessarily in a demographically diverse environment, and yet I was different, right? From the get-go, it was different. And when you're a kid, difference is bad, right? All you want as a kid is to fit in, and so my life was colored early on with the realization that I was different, and that different meant bad. And it may have seemed as though there was this, I know what I'm doing and I'm on the straight and narrow path. But I think the evidence bears fruit, and as we get to in the interview, that was not in fact the case, right? Because if I really had been on that path and been on what the plan was the whole time, I don't think we would definitely not be here right now. This was not the plan.
Right.
So I think it seemed that maybe from your, and that's the stories we tell ourselves. It seemed from a little 6-year-old girl looking at a 12-year-old brother that, he's got his stuff and I don't. But the reality was I was just maybe better at hiding it. So I had 6 years of experience on how to mask things a little bit better. And maybe I was just better at masking.
I did see over the years as I got older, some of the ways that you put on a mask.
Right.
And, you were always accomplished in what I would call like leadership or adult pursuits, right? So you were elected, our school was like Harry Potter. Our
People
school,
don't believe me when I tell them.
our school had houses, house captains, prefects, different color ties.
You'll see it at Harry Potter World if you ever go.
Yeah, so Ramy, you were elected prefect as a senior leader, Cartier house captain. Cartier. Early on, you became a lifeguard, my brother Sharif and I failed all our swimming classes. We dropped out after, they called them AquaQuest. We dropped out after AquaQuest 6. Ramy was a lifeguard, became a manager, eventually moved to Orlando, became a lifeguard at Disney World. That's not easy for a Canadian to do, just pick up and move to the States and work at one of the
summer. It was a summer trip.
Right, but it's the best and biggest amusement park in the world. So you were never content with just the baseline. Canada's Wonderland was not enough. It had to be something more. And so there was always something to look up to in that. But also, as you said, over the years, I definitely saw that you kind of got this sort of value or kind of sense of identity from those things and those accomplishments and the claim to those accomplishments. And it kind of gave you a lane, I think.
Absolutely. Looking for a place, looking to be seen.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And
or validate my place in the world.
I very much identify with that. But it's funny because as a younger kid and you look upwards, I just saw for so long just accomplishments. To drive, accomplishments, things that were celebrated by our parents, things that were celebrated by your schoolmates, by your teachers. And, my looking for my place and my space was just, there was no outcome for a really long time.
Yeah.
It wasn't until years later and us talking and you sharing the true root of some of those experiences and that pursuit that I realized how much struggle and how much, identity related questioning comes from that.
And I don't know if it's any different than what any other person growing up and trying to find their place in the world is. I do know that it felt hard. It felt it felt like a struggle, and I don't know if it's supposed to feel like a struggle, if growing up is supposed to feel like a struggle, if trying to figure out what's actually important to you is supposed to feel that way. I don't know if we had, preconceived ideas of what we were supposed to do or how we were supposed to achieve more than anybody else, but it did feel like there was this pressure to perform, and whether it was the way we wanted to perform or not.
What do you think was the hardest thing in the struggle?
For me, the hardest part is for so long, I was like, okay, I'm different. and I'm different than my parents, and I'm different than my siblings and my friends, and for so long it was just this what should I be focusing on? Trying to not be different anymore, trying to close that out, trying to normalize what I'm supposed to be, or do I just throw everything aside and just do life the way I want to do life? And that's the struggle. It's like, I know how I want my life to go, but I also don't want to keep being different. Because I know how much that hurts. So I have to decide whether I'm going to be okay with that and okay with pushing against people, or am I going to be okay with pushing against myself? And so it was like, I'm going to have to push against someone. Is it going to be myself or against others? And that was the hard part, I think.
What age, if you arrived at this, I believe you have, just based on knowing who you are, and I know life is a journey. We're always on this process of self-actualization and growth, but what age and stage of life would you say that resistance became a lot less, or you kind of arrived at a place where you were able to make a choice in that direction and step more into who you truly are?
Believe it or not, this came up on my job interview for the airline that I currently work for. As you know, I went to school for biological sciences, and that's what I focused on with the goal of becoming a medical doctor. I even took the MCAT and all of that. So obviously when I was in my interview at the major airline that I'm currently at, they have my transcripts in front of me and my life story is part of the interview. And it's like, wait a second, this doesn't align with someone who's trying to be a pilot. Why did you go in to study this doesn't make sense. And can you explain yourself to us? And it was I knew the answer. I wasn't prepared to actually tell them the real answer, and I ended up telling them the real answer. So I think that a lot of times when people have trauma in their life or something traumatic happened in their life, it's a fork in the road. Yeah. You and I went through something with our younger brother. And he was a senior in high school, and I'm at university studying biological sciences with the goal to be a doctor. And he had a medical issue come up. Medical issue that was pretty bad, resulted in a change of his life, and resulted in hospitalization and
multiple surgeries,
and his senior year of high school was lost to him. He spent it mainly in the hospital, between a hospital and the house, trying to recover. And through that, still working towards trying to go on to college and do all the things that he had to do. And I think that point in my life made me more aware of how fragile life was and how I was only going to get this shot to do what I wanted to do. And even that wasn't guaranteed to me. And so I remember a moment where, he was going to go into surgery and I'm still studying for an exam. And I put the pen down and said, no, this has to be the life I want. This has to be the life that I want. And all of this that I was doing in these books and studying these things that I was interested in but not passionate about, I have to put it away. I'm going to finish what I started, but I have to do what I really wanted to do. And that was, to me, the turning point. I think that was a fork in the road that says, no matter what, even if I did everything I could, because I always looked at my younger brother as being less different than me, more accepted than me, but even if I did that, life could do something to me, or life could happen in such a way that I would now be back to square one, starting different again, like he had to do. And so I'm just going to damn well do what I need to do. That moment gave me the strength to proceed down the path. Just to see his strength going through that,
for sure,
gave me the strength to, or at least the courage at the time to finally. And it's weird because you go back in life later, you know that both of our parents are doctors, and both of them really wanted. Well, I don't know, mom more than dad.
Somebody to be a doctor.
Wanted us to be physicians.
At least one, and none of the three of us.
The irony of the situation about that, though, when you go back and look back in life and talk to them in life, neither one of them wanted to be doctors. Mom wanted to be an engineer.
Dad wanted to be a pharmacist.
Dad wanted to be a pharmacist.
Which is hilarious. Our dad is one of the most artistic people on the face of the planet, but his desired career that his dad told me he couldn't do was pharmacy.
I don't think he ever really loved medicine. I think he's like you said, he's an artist at heart. But Mom, I think she's embraced it and does. I think Mom, at least her identity is based on it. But
Yeah.
So it is funny that they necessarily didn't get to do what they want to do, but they also they weren't necessarily thrilled about me pursuing something different.
So did you know at that point when you're having these thoughts that your true desire is aviation, or was it an exploration?
This is going to date me. I do turn 40 this year, but so this year, so the computers come to our school, and we're supposed to do these career days, and then we get these CD-ROMs, which are these discs to put in a computer, and it has to go explore different careers. And I'm just clicking through all the different careers and reading about them and exploring them. And one of them was pilot, and I spent them. So I still remember that sitting in that computer lab and like saying, "This is kind of what I wanted to do."
In high school?
In high school, yeah. That was pretty clear. I don't know if you remember, but one of our uncles bought me, like you could tell that I was interested, and bought me a flight simulator. He was really big into cars, and I'd say, "You're really big into cars. I'm more really big into airplanes." And so he bought me this simulator, this flight simulator, and I would, most people I think they're playing video games when they're younger. I guess it is kind of a video game, but I would just sit there and like learn how to fly an airplane out of like Chicago's Megas Field and then fly to like a different place. And and that's really what it's not a complete random disconnect. I mean, we did have a grandmother who was in the aviation industry, and prior to 9/11, we had numerous opportunities. I don't think you ever did.
I did when we went to Egypt and when I was 7 years old.
For me, sitting in the flight deck as they took off and climbing through a cloud layer, it was an imprint that was magical to me.
That's beautiful. So I do recall the flight simulator days.
You do? Okay.
Because you stayed home for college.
Right.
And I was young while you were in your pre-med days in college. But I imagine that living in the house with your preteen, teen, younger sister and her parents, who were constantly at odds because I'm a teenage girl, you locked yourself in the room a lot. You were in your room most of the time. And of course, I'm your curious cat little sister. So I always thought you were maybe doing something that would be funny to catch you doing or to tell on you or do something silly.
Something more appropriate of a teenage boy.
Right. And instead, I would open the door and you were literally just glued to the computer playing Microsoft Flight Simulator.
Like flying a flight in real time.
Yeah.
Not sped up. Just sitting there in real time. It was
hours. But clearly it had, they always say like, oh, I don't want the kids to play video games. Right. Clearly it had.
It was the only video game I was decent at. Everything else remember duck hunter, I had to put the gun to like the TV and try to shoot the.
So you're not a professional duck hunter?
I'm bad at everything.
Okay. So
every video game. And flying drones, by the way.
You can't fly drones?
No, I crashed one into a tree.
That's hilarious. Right. One of my favorite stories, and I would love for you to expand on it a little bit, is that you were at a bit of a as you were speaking of it, you were at a bit of a crossroads of, okay, well, I could apply to medical school, or I could go and apply for this commercial aviation license. Yeah. And I remember you telling me that you had a dream that it was World War II or some big war, and there was like a warplane in the sky where there was a surgery or a medical procedure happening in the back of the plane.
Yes.
And you were in fact
in the front of the plane.
In the front of the plane, flying plane.
Yes.
And you're not a surgeon.
Yes.
So tell me about that.
Yeah.
And how heavy was it on your mind at the time that it kind of made its way into your dreams, and how impactful was that moment?
I think it was heavy in a few things. It was heavy in that you don't want to disappoint your family. You don't want to disappoint your parents. When you're the kid of immigrants, we don't have the luxury of this backstop, right? I mean, there's no generational wealth to speak of. There's this idea of taking risks. That just doesn't exist. There's a sure thing. There's what I know, and you're always comfortable with what you know. The other element part of me was I didn't want to appear to myself that I was quitting. part of me was taking the MCAT was to show I could still do this. I could get in if I chose to do that I still have the intellect or the capability to be able to finish what I started. I just choose not to. And it was kind of prove to myself and to the world around me that I'm just choosing to leave this. The hard part was really the telling people that this is what I'm going to do, having that discussion.
So let's talk a little bit about that. You were the firstborn. Right. This is the family business, okay? Right. Yeah. Mom's a doctor, dad's a doctor, her sister's a doctor, her brother-in-law's a doctor. Right. It's a pretty, important profession in our family. Right. I never felt like mom and dad explicitly said, we want you to be a doctor.
Maybe they've given up by the time you came.
I think they gave up by the time I was 6 because I yelled so angerly that I would never do it. Right. With that said, I also made decisions in favor of what I thought I should do or the closest thing.
It's weird because now saying this, it sounds like a coming out story of there's like, hey, how do I break this? There were elements of our family that was much more open in general. And I remember there were some of them that said, oh, I have a friend of mine that I grew up with that was trying to be a pilot and he's unemployed and it's been a terrible business and you're probably not going to be able to get a job.
Also,
there were a lot of naysayers.
2007. Yeah. Okay, so 6 years prior. Right. What had happened with Middle Eastern or Arab pilots who were in who were learning to fly planes
in Florida? Just that point.
Right. Yeah. If people were concerned about
prejudice,
you getting a job,
it came from a good place. Everyone, I think, we had the blessing in our family. Everyone, I think, came from a good place. It necessarily was not the best advice, or not what I needed to hear at the time. It was enough that it stuck with me. Right. But they came from a place of fear. I think a lot of what holds people back, looking back at life now, is fear. I think is that people don't want to do the things that they really matter to them because they're scared.
And they project whatever their fears or their thoughts are onto you. Right. So obviously you overcame that. Yeah. We're here today. Right. You are a pilot for one of the biggest airline in not even the country, in the world. International airline in the world. Yeah. You're one of the youngest captains in the fleet, in the airline. Incredibly accomplished. And you've survived recessions, you've survived pandemic, you've survived things that pilots, get laid off, furloughed, et cetera, all the time. Yeah. You're clearly an asset to the organization that you're in and defied all expectations, fears, et cetera, that anybody expressed to you. I want to talk just a little bit about what the industry, in its own resistance, in its own, how it has grown and evolved overall. Yeah. Something, in case it's not obvious to the people who are watching, you're brown. You're brown. It's not just a tan, he's brown. You're a brown pilot, okay? Yeah. In a post 9/11 world. A lot of people believe that their identity, rightfully so, their racial identity, their physical appearance, their background, would impact their chances of succeeding in a specific industry, any industry. If you're not sort of a traditional, and we know that to be true, okay? There's bias in every industry, right? Black, brown, Hispanic, female, gay, whatever your representation or your identity is, different from a traditional role, right? Now, aviation, talk to me a little bit about historically what it looked like to be a pilot, how you differ from that, and going back to what we talked about in terms of this feeling of I'm different in private schools and whatever we were, you have to overcome probably a few mental limitations around your identity for which you've already always felt a bit like an other. Sure. Now you're entering an industry, and you're in an industry, continue to be in an industry, where your otherness is pretty loud.
Right.
So talk to me a little bit about the changes in the industry. Did you feel like you were going to be discriminated against?
Sure. If you had just put on your channel that you're doing an interview with a major airline pilot, and you asked your viewers to draw a picture of what that person, or show me, and and gave them $1,000 opportunity to do that, it wouldn't look like me. So I obviously know that I'm not the image. I'm obviously different than what people think about when they think about as a pilot. So
Every plane I've ever gotten on has been an older white male.
So, and that is changing. It definitely is. The more likely to get on a plane with a female pilot or a pilot of color or anything, and that's good. And there is definitely resistance to that change because people are comfortable with what they know and what's similar.
Within the airline, within the passengers, where do you feel the most resistance?
I think, I don't think it's necessarily within the airline. I think it's, your older colleagues they're just used to a certain way and used to a certain life experience that's very similar, that they look at the person to their right and all they're really seeing is a younger version of themselves that kind of have the same similar upbringing and the same sort of cultural background, and that's what they're familiar with and that's what they're comfortable with. There's a lot that changes on a flight deck, and so having that sameness, having that relatability, there is obviously some value in that, and oftentimes that was celebrated. The diversity part is not necessarily celebrated, and that's changing. Definitely, I think the airlines are doing a much better job of celebrating that also, and saying there is strength in this environment and also having different backgrounds, a different frame of references. But to answer your question, I think Dad had told me a while ago that when you are different, you have to be so good that someone can't tell you no.
So do you feel like you had to be more excellent than your maybe traditional white male older counterparts?
At least I felt like, and even if that was my own self-limiting belief, I felt that I had to work harder. I think I had to prove that no matter what, I was just as good, if not better.
You're worthy of the spot that you've been given.
I felt that was not their responsibility. It was mine. It was mine to prove my worth and prove that I should be there. And that just made me work harder. I mean, maybe it's not for everyone, but I felt the burden was on me. It was not kind of innocent until proven guilty. In my mind, it was guilty of not being worthy to be there until I prove otherwise. And if I worked hard enough, nobody can say no.
Is that advice that you would give, and I'm not just talking about the aviation industry, right? It's very hard to overcome a limiting belief that you have about whether you'll be accepted in a profession or in an environment. What advice do you have for anybody that knows that there's a good chance they might be passed over for a job? They might, once they get in the job, they still might be questioned and doubted for their role.
You can't control that. The only thing you can control is to make it so painful to pass you up that no one is going to want to do that. That's the only thing that you can control. And the way you do that is just be the person that one has to have working for them, or has to have in their organization, or has to have on their team, because you just bring so much to that team that they would be shooting themselves in the foot to use their biases to eliminate you or discriminate against you.
Dear Ramy, I would like to extend my heartfelt thanks for your unwavering commitment to all those aboard Northwest Airlines Flight 253 on Christmas Day 2009. Americans will forever remember the swift and heroic actions of passengers and crew, which were critical to saving lives and protecting our nation. As president, I have no more important responsibility than keeping the American people safe. I am grateful for your dedication and for the courage of all who defend our country at home and around the world. Thank you again, and I wish you all the best. Sincerely, Barack Obama. Obviously, you went through, I'm sure, lots of inner dialogue with others, as you mentioned. And struggle. Where did it come from within yourself to stand on that business and say, I'm doing it. I appreciate this. I hear you. I've thought about it. Still doing it.
Ultimately, there was a time in my life, and I can't even put it on, where I started saying, I'm just going to stop being scared. Everything's going to be hard. Even things I didn't think were going to be hard are going to end up being hard at some point, and I'm just going to stop being scared.
What was most attractive to you about the profession? And I ask this also from the lens of, was there anything, you've explained there's lots of voices and internal struggle. You stayed at home for college, okay? You didn't go away. You lived at home with mom and dad. And then you basically did like the extreme opposite, right? You don't even have a home. You're just, I mean, you have one, but you're a nomad, right? As for a profession. Did getting away have
Something to do with
something to, was there something attractive about just literally taking off?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think absolutely. Among the community, there are people who fly. A lot of it is a chance to escape. I remember they asked me to speak at a graduation speech of new pilots, and so I was trying to think of what this means and how life is, and sometimes you wake up. We wake up in Los Angeles, the Marine layers in, and it's a cloudy day, and maybe that depresses you a little bit, and maybe that holds you down a little bit. But when you fly, you get in there, you get on the runway, you push the power up, and you decide to put the nose in the air. And as long as you keep climbing, you're going to find the sun. No matter what, I get to find the sun. I just have to keep climbing. And there's an escape there. It's this sense that, unless you fly, you don't get, we get to leave even the most dreary, sad, depressing day, the day you don't want to get out of your bed. As long as I put my uniform on and I go and I pull that nose up, have that faith that it's going to be there for me and climb, I'm going to get to have a better. And there's no other job like that.
I think what's so powerful about what you just said is, most people are trying to escape from their job. Most people are trying to, and I'm not saying there's no days like that. I'm sure the job comes with plenty of stress and days when you're like, I really just want all this time off. Although, they give you a nice.
We get a fair amount.
They give you, I mean, thank goodness, because it's an exhausting profession, and we want well-rested pilots to fly our planes. But yeah, I mean, for the most part, I know there's this thing around, do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life. And people do find that on the ground. But, what you're saying goes to a level of, I mean, the job is the escape.
It is the escape. And it's funny because you could be a kid and you could want to be a professional basketball player, and so you just play basketball and have fun, and you want to be a professional soccer player, and 99% of the time you'll never be a professional basketball player, and you won't be a professional soccer player. In my career, there are people that pay a lot of money to fly for fun, as a catharsis, as an escape.
Sure. Lots of hobby pilots.
There's a lot. There's a huge community of it, and it's something that is attainable, and I get to do it, and they pay me.
And pay you.
And they pay me.
A lot. So, okay. Yeah. You've made the decision, you're doing it, you're there, you've been accepted to the school. Not an easy process, right? You get there, you're learning now, you've already done your hours for personal, you're learning how to fly commercial airlines, right? Is schooling and training what you expected? What's the experience like? How long is it? How hard is it?
I was blessed with a really good flight instructor on my first day. And the story I tell about this is there's a maneuver called slow flight. And slow flight, just without getting too technical, is being able to control an airplane when it's really, really slow. So it's all the controls are kind of mushy because an airplane flies by deflecting air. And so if you're slow, there's less air and it's mushy. And I had learned that maneuver when I was just studying as a private pilot before. And so the first day I'm at this flight school and I get in the airplane and my instructor says, okay, let's do slow flight. And I go ahead and set the airplane up to do slow flight, what I thought was really great. I did really well, I thought. And he says, okay, my airplane. He takes the airplane from me and he flies me right back to the base. And I said, what's going on? He says, did you study slow flight? I said, what do you mean? I just did slow flight. He says, you didn't follow our manuals and do the procedure. In professional aviation, everything has a textbook and a procedure and a direct, and I wasn't exposed. It was just before that, kind of the feel of it as a private pilot. And so it really made clear to me that this is a different type of flying, that a lot of the work, a lot of the learning is going to happen on the ground with the books, and the air is just to perfect the technique. And because you cannot learn, and I think that goes to a lot about, we talk about how you and I learn differently, and we might learn differently from other people around us. But a large amount of what you can't learn in a stressful environment. I can't acquire knowledge when there's someone talking in my ear, there's an engine going, it's hot, it's uncomfortable, it's bumpy. That's not the place that I'm going to learn. I'm going to have to learn in the quietness of my own room. We call it in flying chair flying, where we literally will just sit in a chair and I will just go through in my own mind the exact procedure and keep doing it until it's just rote in my brain. And then I go out, and then even under a stressful situation, my body just takes over kind of in its own version of autopilot. I cannot, and nobody can really learn when the stress is so high, when all the stimulus is there. We need to learn it before we get into that, and then that way it's just perfecting it when it's loud and crazy.
As a science major and also someone who knows a lot of pilots, you probably know that the majority of research does point to aviation as a career that's really great for people who learn differently and fall somewhere on the neurodivergent spectrum.
Yeah.
A lot of people think that being neurodivergent means you can't focus or you're inattentive. Yeah. But what it actually means is you're attentive to everything. Yes. You're focused on everything. Right. To me, that's why a career like aviation, they say aviation surgery, which is funny because you also wanted to be a doctor, be a surgeon, surgery, anything that requires you to be dialed in to a lot of things at once is something that really attracts people who learn the way that you're describing.
Yeah.
Because once you have figured out your system for learning and you can turn on that autopilot, you can tap in.
To being able to look at 5 things at once. And literally our scan of instruments is 5 instruments at the same time. Looking at seeing what 5 things are doing at the exact same time to tell you what state not one instrument to tell you whether you're climbing or not. You have to know that, and what rate you're climbing, and what speed you're going at, and what your bank angle. And so it's 5 different instrument clusters that your eyes are supposed to just do this the whole time.
Right.
And capture that information while your eyes are doing that.
Right.
So yeah.
Obviously you figured out a lot about how you learn and what you need from just training, doing, learning on the fly, etc. As you're doing this and learning this about yourself, what did you learn about yourself that has always been kind of in process for you in your life that's reflected in how you fly a plane or how you learned how to fly a plane? Like what's the life comparison?
I would say in aviation we call it flow, but I think in outside of aviation now they call it workflow. It's a term. I think to me, having a flow for my life has been a game changer. So I know that life has variables I can't control, but the ones that I can, I'm going to have it in a set pattern so it doesn't take any brain power for me to be able to use them. So I do everything the same way every time. So that way, if things are a little bit different, it flags right away. I know that something is not working or something is different this time. Something is going to need my attention over and above what I normally have to give it.
And that's in the plane and outside of the plane.
It's everything. I mean, I wish I could bring you along and you see as I get into my hotel room on a layover, it is ridiculous. It is, I mean, okay. So I'll walk in and the first thing I'll do is I'll leave my bags where I'll never put your bags ever on any furniture in a hotel room. Ever. Don't put your,
I'm not sure I
PSA,
know why.
do not put your bag on it for many reasons, but bed bugs is the biggest reason. Don't ever do that. So I leave my bag exactly where it's at. And the first thing, at my airline, we're required to wear a hat. I don't love wearing a hat, but the greatest thing about the hat, I'll take it off and I'll put it down on one of the tables and I'll take my ID badge and put it in there. I'll take my tie clip, I'll put it in there, and I'll take my pen and I'll put it in there. As soon as I do that, I'm going to go into my phone and set an alarm for an hour before van pickup the next day. If the van is going to pick me up at 5:30 p.m. to go to the airport, I'm setting an alarm for 4:30 p.m. Because at 4:30 p.m., no matter what I'm doing, I'm going to be shower on to get showered and shaved.
So the system that you have,
Yes.
the repeat autopilot system you have for
Every day.
flying the plane, it exists and starts long before you get on the plane.
Way before.
The whole system, A to Z.
Exactly.
And that-
when I leave my house here to head to the airport is going to be the exact same time. Now, the show time is going to change every trip that I fly.
Right.
But what time I leave here is going to be exactly the same amount of time before every show time. So if I have to be at the airport at 4:45, I will always be leaving here at 3:45.
Okay. Now,
Period. Yeah.
because I have a personal relationship with you,
Yeah.
I know that this was not always the case. So, and again, because as in our adulthood, we've discussed struggles that we share mutually that I didn't know anybody else in our family shared besides me. And that a lot of that has to do with having difficulty structuring time, having difficulty I still, to this day, have a lot of difficulty. I mean, my podcast here is called ADH Achievers. It's ultimately about, breaking free of the shackles of, for me, it's ADHD, but breaking free of the shackles of what that does, learning to put systems and structures in place so I can be an ADH achiever or an achiever, right? Now for you, again, I've known you, so I know that what you're describing had to be developed, had to be refined.
Yes.
Talk about, to me, that's like climbing Everest, what you're describing.
Yeah.
I would rather climb Everest than figure out how to do the same thing. I mean, I want it.
Yes. Yeah.
Just like anyone wants to be at the top of Everest.
Right.
But to climb it. Talk to me about climbing Everest. Because that's what that is.
I think for me, it came to the point was if I didn't do it, I would fail. And if I failed, I felt really, really, really bad. I really didn't want to fail. Because I had already, we go back to that discussion, I'd made that decision that I'm going to stop pushing against myself and I'm going to start pushing against from others. I don't want to prove that they were right and fail. I had to develop and trial and error. I said, the less things in my day that I have to think about, the easier my life becomes. It gives me bandwidth in my mind to be able to think about the stuff that actually matters. This interview, you and I today. So it meant I had to be here at 3, so that meant I was going to start shaving by 2 at the latest, which meant that I was going to start working out by 12 so that I can be done by 1, because it takes me about an hour if I take my time to get from when I get into the shower to when I finish shaving. It goes to, and it was just work my way back all the time, because if I don't do that, and I have to now start in the middle of the day thinking about that, then I don't have a chance to go through what I want to share with you today.
Right.
What I want to talk to you about, this important stuff. If I have to worry about the minutia, how do I even get there? I'm never going to make it. So I really had to put as much of my life on you just do it the same way every time. Just do the not important stuff. You have to leave room for flexibility.
Yeah.
Life happens.
Yes.
But the beauty is when your life is programmed in the not important stuff, when the changes happen, you're just better at dealing with them, because you're sensitive to them. You see things going off the rails. You see things deteriorating, because this is your sixth sense already knows this is not what I'm used to.
Right.
And you're just better at okay, like spidey sense, I need to work on this. This part of it is deviant.
This needs attention.
Right.
This can be on
This can-
autopilot.
the rest
I
of it,
know it's taken
already-
care of. I can handle this thing. So let's pivot and talk about in-flight.
In-flight.
In-plane.
Yes.
Craziest obstacle, sudden change, life happens moment,
Right.
where everything else you're doing in the plane has to go on autopilot because you gotta get some people, like you've now been flying commercial aviation for how many years?
What now? Since 2011, so
Almost like 13, 14, yeah.
years? Right.
So
yeah.
craziest, unexpected,
Right.
all right, I gotta turn the brake, I'm off autopilot now.
Yeah. I've had engine failures going across the ocean. I think that would probably be.
What does that mean? For people who don't fly planes or just passengers of planes, if I'm in a plane and the engine fails going across the ocean, what should I be concerned about?
It means you're not going to wherever you plan on going, unless you're already really close to it. But typically, every airliner that you fly has at least 2 engines. That's the minimum. And the airplane is certified to fly on one. It's not certified to take you where you need to go, but it's certified to not come out of the air on one engine. And so when you depart out of Honolulu and you were to have an engine failure of some kind in aviation, and maybe it's good for life in general, we call it aviate, navigate, communicate.
I'm going to say it one more time. Aviate?
Aviate, navigate, and communicate. So we prioritize, we triage the situation. So the first thing we do is fly the airplane.
I would hope so.
Right. But it's so, I say that, but it's so easy to get distracted. Because the moment that happens and you're now starting to turn, air traffic control is talking to you and they want to know what's going on, and the flight attendants are going to start calling you, and if the engine's on fire, they're going to call you in a panic and they want to know what's going on. And your human instinct is to communicate with all of these people, to allay their fears, to talk to you're a human too. But by doing that, you can get distracted and forget to do the most important thing.
Which is fly the plane.
Don't crash.
Okay.
And we joke about it, but there's been many accidents that they got fixated on something else that was not that. It sounds intuitive, but believe it or not, life can distract you, and the people around you can distract you, and you can forget to fly the plane and crash. And if you do that, even if you're the best communicator or the best at knowing where you're supposed to be going, it's over. So that's really our first thing. So do that, then figure out now so solve the past, work on the future, and then communicate it. And that's really how we deal with you say, how do you deal with that? That's really what we do, is figure out how do we deal with what just happened, where are we gonna go, and then communicate to the people around us that need to know. And I think that if you can even apply that to your life, I think whenever life throws you some form of adversity, fly the plane first. Don't crash. Because if you crash, nothing else matters. You can be the best talker, you can be the best at coming up with goals, but if you're not there to live them, it's over. So I think that we've kind of drilled into our mind from early on in this profession, and I think it also has helped me in my life. Yeah.
Just keep flying the plane.
Keep working.
Everything else figures itself out as long as you stay.
Once you've stabilized everything, then now I can start worrying about what the plan is for the future.
Wow.
But let me stabilize the crisis I'm going through first.
That's beautiful, and actually transitions perfectly into what I would like to talk about,
Sure.
which is, our mother, as you mentioned, was worried about career stability, was worried about, is this, she said, I went to medical school, I became a doctor, I was a doctor for 30 years, and I never had a question about...
Never unemployed, never, right. Yeah.
Now, you did all of this, right? Made this huge pivot, made this huge transition, went to the aviation school, and then we hit the recession, right? So that recession was 2008 to 2012, right? Pretty big, major economic crisis in the country, which resulted in a layoff.
Yeah.
How many years had you been flying?
I just at that point professionally, just about a year when everything collapsed.
So a year?
Pretty junior.
You are living your dream.
Right. Not making any money though.
No.
We were paid really bad back then.
As a junior, you were a
First year, first officer, yeah.
But you were seeing the future.
Yes.
You were living a dream.
Right.
So a lot of people go to your university, commercial aviation, they don't necessarily get the job off the bat.
Or they even finish their license.
Finish their license. So you finish your license, you receive this placement. How long is school?
Just about 2 years.
2 years. 2 years of that schooling on top of what you did in your personal. I remember you mentioning to me just rigorous examinations, which we love. We love that for pilots. Please continue to test and
still
take
test every day.
And I think you
year.
mentioned something crazy, like as you still test, you have to get over 85 on almost every test.
On like limitations, stuff like that, like knowing about your memorized limitations, it's 100%. You can't, you have to know everything.
Got you. So with all that, you go through all that, you're flying professionally at this major airline, living your dream for a year. Then you get laid off. how the hell do you aviate, so to speak, knowing that this might be, do you think this might be it? What's going through your mind?
Well, I know I'm going to rapidly run out of money. I know that's going to happen to me. And because you have to remember at the time in the financial crisis, I was not the only one who was going through that. Many people were. I just remember at the time I was living in Daytona Beach, and I was, when I finally found a job flight instructing, it was out of Orlando. So my house was in Daytona, and I find a job out of Orlando, and I have to drive from Daytona to Orlando every day to go to work. I found a flight instructing job.
Okay.
Yeah. And so gas is $4 a gallon. And again, we weren't getting paid anything, really. I was spending all of my money just on gas. So here I am thinking, this is not sustainable. And at some point, I'm not proud of it, but I had to rely on food stamps. I don't think you ever knew that. And it got to the point, I was that, and there was stuff also in a personal life. I was dating somebody, and then obviously this financial thing added strain to that. And so I was tapped. I was really in a situation where I can't afford to put gas in the car, and I'm eating ramen and canned food, and I'm too proud to tell mom and dad what's going on.
For the record,
Yeah.
I don't think that you should be ashamed of being on food stamps.
Right.
Mostly because, first of all, the ebbs and flows of economics in this country and in this world, okay?
Yeah.
You were certainly not the only person on food stamps at that time.
I had no insurance.
Right.
Because I had 6-month waiting period from the time I started the job before I would qualify for insurance.
So were you given any form of hope or pathway back into this industry that you had carved out for yourself, or did you think it was over?
Well, I didn't think it was over because it was a furlough, and furlough means it's not permanent like a layoff. It just means, you don't have a job right now, and when we start hiring again, before we start hiring off the street, you'll be given the opportunity to come back.
Got it.
And so I was, I knew that if I could stick it out, it was the same thing. If I could just keep fighting, that one day it would turn around for me. But the issue was, how do I keep fighting?
Now, from my recollection, you mentioned flight instructing. From my recollection, you ultimately ended up actually getting a job that had some security to it in terms of instructing.
At a big flight
Talk
school.
to us about that period. I believe I recall there was some back and forth with China, international flying still, recruiting pilots. Tell me about what it felt like at that time. Now you're still in your industry, and you have now sort of this job security, this stability that you were longing
paid
for.
enough for me to survive, and I found a flight school that was, nobody in the United States was getting loans to be able to do flight training, so there was very few domestic students, people from the United States learning to fly at the time. But I found a school that did a lot of contract work with Chinese airlines, and I started instructing there, and then became an examiner there, and then a flight standards manager, and eventually they recognized that I had a talent, I think, for talking and communicating effectively what the product was. And so they had me on the business development team, going overseas to China, pitching it to new airlines, getting new contracts and things like that. So it was out of that period in my life, it was something to, again, focus on something that was different, and something that was a skill set that I thought I always had, but had never exercised before.
What do you think what was the value of that time in your life? And was there ever a moment where you thought, you know what, this is what I'm gonna do, as opposed to going back into potentially an unstable?
I knew that my initial love of flying full time that never went away. So I knew that if given the opportunity, I would want to go back. But it was my first real test as an adult of having a kind of huge monkey wrench thrown into my life that I wasn't planning on, and being able to overcome it and prove to myself that I was resilient, that I could pivot and be resilient and do something different, and that I could succeed at that I wasn't just going to languish at some sort of, thing that I didn't, but I would still love it, and I would still thrive in it, and I would still rise in it. And that to me was the most important thing that I learned from that time in my
You
life.
could aviate and then what were
Navigate and then communicate, right?
Figure
That I
it
could
out.
solve the crisis, figure out a path forward, and then tell people what that path was going to be.
Right.
It proved to me what I thought I knew was that if I stuck with this, if I kept plugging through it, that I could come up with a solution. And it ended up happening later in life also.
Right.
Yeah.
I was about to say, so now fast forward, okay, about 12 years
Right.
from
From
this time
2008 to what?
to 2020.
Till 2020.
Pandemic hits.
Pandemic.
Now, we started off talking about kind of coming together in our life experience, learning from each other, growing closer. I believe that the pandemic was actually really that time for us.
Yeah.
Which is funny. I wasn't living here in Los Angeles yet. I was stuck in Canada. I didn't want to fly to the States because I didn't want to get stuck in case I had to go back to work or whatever. They said 2 weeks.
Right. 2 weeks to flatten the curve.
They said 2 weeks to flatten the curve. So, when the curve did not, in fact, get flattened, they did
flattening.
not aviate and communicate
Right.
or any of those
It was
things.
not solving the crisis.
They did not solve the crisis, in fact. One day they just decided the crisis was
It's
over.
over. Yeah, that's it. Right. You don't have that luxury in an airplane, unfortunately.
yeah.
I'm just
So-
going to stop pretending that the engine's on fire. Right. Yeah.
The pandemic hit and you became exceptionally open and vulnerable with me,
Right.
which is something I really appreciated because I think in that time, so many of us were confused, scared, struggling, mental health,
Yeah.
career-related anxiety
Yeah.
for many people. Talk to me about what happened to the industry, what happened to you, and some of the choices that you had to face in that moment, and what you were feeling.
So at that point, I had been at my current airline long enough that using historical numbers, I felt I was safe. I never use that word anymore because there's no such thing as safe anymore. But
You do fly planes for a
Right.
living, so.
I felt that that's it. Nothing can happen that I could end up furloughed or on the street again. Because at that point, when we're going into 2020, I don't know, for the people that don't know, and a furlough, the most junior pilot gets furloughed first, and it goes up the list as long as the airline needs to go. So at that point, I had 3,000 pilots that were junior to me. And in the airline's entire history, almost 100 years at that point, they had never furloughed anywhere near to that amount of people. So I thought, that's it. My life is now, I'm going to coast. I'm on autopilot. The pandemic happens. All of a sudden, I'm flying an airplane from Los Angeles to New York, an airplane that normally seats almost 300 people with 2 people on it. And I remember looking at my captain at the time, I was a first officer, and saying, I'm going to lose my job. And he's like, how many people do you have underneath you? That's the term we use for people junior to you. And I said, 3,000. He said, oh, no, you'll be fine. And I said, we're flying airplanes empty all around the world. And a few weeks later, the financial reality of what that meant for the airlines, we were losing $100 million a day and just burned through every amount of savings that company had very quickly. And in fact, when it came time for them to adjust staffing levels and hand out a notice for how many pilots they needed to furlough, it was in fact 3,000 that they were going to need to furlough. Right. And I was I was one of the most senior people to receive one of those letters that your job may be impacted. Even after all of these years, I thought for sure there's no way that it's going to happen again.
Right.
And it was happening again.
And at this point, at the first time, you had been flying for 1 year.
Right.
You
Now-
found a great pivot.
Right.
12 years into a career
Right.
that you've described as an escape. You've described it as really it's
Something I
it's
look forward to
It's a
every
tenet
day.
of your identity.
Right. Yeah.
There's not
I'm passionate
really
about it,
what
yeah.
kind, I can imagine that aviating your way out of that and seeing the pivot was even significantly more challenging.
Because
12,
I didn't
13
anticipate
years into
needing
your-
to pivot.
Right.
I didn't anticipate something of this level happening.
Right.
I think like most people in COVID, no one No one thought we were going to be locked in our rooms or in our houses or wiping down groceries. I don't think that was the reality of all of a sudden how our life changed in the span of a month was a lot. And I was dealing with that, plus my career seemingly imploding again.
Right. And I know we talked a little bit about furlough earlier.
Yeah.
To my recollection, the stakes in this case were much higher. I remember you describing to me that you basically had to make a choice to kind of wait it out, accept this furlough, or to basically leave commercial aviation and maybe do something else like private planes or FedEx planes or something.
At the time, the way it looked was that the airline was never going to be able to return back to its normal size. We all thought that the world was changing, that what people were never going to travel the way they traveled again. People would not be scared to get on airplanes ever again. And it was one of those things that, looking back in hindsight, I started realizing that anytime something looks permanent or looks like it's going to change, it's not. I thought at the time that what I was watching was a change in how we were going to live our lives for the rest of our lives, which meant people wouldn't fly and they would have no need for me, and I was going to have to figure out a new way to live.
So that's pretty anxiety provoking, I would say.
Yeah.
What type of toll did that take on your mental health?
Yeah.
How did you start to resolve? And how long was it before you realized, hey, this isn't permanent, I'm gonna get called back to work?
Yeah. So admittedly, in the first few weeks, I didn't handle it well at all. And the only thing that kept me together was calling you and calling mom and just talking. And we ended up, my birthday's April 1st, which is pretty close to when the pandemic started. And we ended up deciding to do a big family chat and Zoom. Zoom was like a new thing. Right. Zoom. That was, and then all of a sudden that started to make that, hey, there are things changing, but still there's a lot that's still the same. My base is still there. My support system is still there. It started to pick me up from a bad place. You were a big part of that. You were, a really big part of, because the beauty of what you always brought to my life was that life was never easy for you. Mm. There wasn't really at the time a time where you could look back and say, I'm coasting. You always had to scrap. And here I was enjoying the fact that I was coasting and now have to scrap again. The person I knew who could just scrap all the time was you. That you had that, you never had that luxury to just coast.
For me, as someone who was so late in life to find stability in a career, the pandemic hit in March 2020. Yeah. I had started my first the full-time job that I've now been with that company for 5 years. Yeah. Prior to that, I had only ever been with a company for 6 months. Right. I had tried many different iterations of the job that I do in social media marketing, etc. I started working full-time at the company that I'm employed with in October of 2019, and the pandemic hit in March 2020. Right. So my experience was not one where my identity was so intrinsically tied to this. I was always a job, I love what I do and I was grateful to do it, but at the end of the day, there always was going to be more for me in life, because I've always had to find my value from something else other than that.
And you'd been there before.
Many times. I had been laid off many, many times.
You'd been there before.
Before finding any type of
success. So for you, you're like, what's the big deal?
But right. I understood that there was a big deal, and and I really empathized with the position. But I think for me, what I really wanted to help you see was you have skills.
Yeah.
All skills in life are transferable.
Yeah.
And I think your experience in this world, I remember, I don't know if you know this, but I started making a spreadsheet. Yeah. I wrote down all the things that I think are your acquired skills. Yeah. And then I wrote down all of the industries and some of them were aviation related. I said, maybe you can work for the FAA and help develop regulations. Yeah. Maybe you can go back into teaching, maybe blah, blah, blah. But some of them weren't.
Yeah.
Like you had bought this home that we're sitting in right now as like a co-investment. You had done a lot. Yeah. You had done a lot. in your life that I felt could create space for you to have a great career, regardless of whether or not, once you kind of grieved this profession.
It's weird because when you're in it, you can't see it.
You can't see it. But then you did see it.
I did see it.
And you got your real estate license.
I did. Yeah. Plug, by the way, if you need to sell a house.
You need to sell a house.
In Los Angeles.
In Los Angeles.
Yeah.
And I mean, that was so motivating because I watched you go from this place of, honestly, truly,
Despair.
I don't think I'd ever connected with you. Not saying you'd never been in a place of despair before, but I connected with you in this space of despair. And I felt, oh my goodness, like I've never seen my brother like this before.
Anxious.
And then you turned that anxiety into something so powerful and practical and pragmatic.
Yeah.
And to be honest, that's a big part of why I want to talk to you. Yeah. Because what you described in the pivot that you do on the plane, you've done off the plane so many times in the time that I've known you, and it's so powerful. Yeah. Life requires, it has emergency landings, it has all these, I mean, the airplane metaphor could go on forever.
Right, yeah. We talk about headwinds and tailwinds.
Right.
Right, everyone talks, sometimes we have tailwinds, sometimes we have headwinds.
Yeah, and you, my friend, have become a master of the pivot. Right. And
you know what the secret though is?
Please.
An airplane can't take off in tailwinds. Tailwinds sound great. Something's pushing at your back. But it's only when an airplane pushes from the wind from the front, a headwind, can it get enough power to lift off the ground.
So you need resistance.
In the resistance, that's when I've found strength. That's it. The only time in my life where I've grown is pushing against the wind. Is in resistance.
And before we wrap up, as your younger sister, if you could give me one thing that you really want me to carry with me through this life.
Never stop fighting. Never stop fighting. Life is going to happen. It's not always going to be fair. It doesn't have to be fair, and it's not fair to most people. But there is a sunrise as long as you can keep fighting. I used to say, as long as you keep climbing, you will find that sun. And that's it. Life is, sometimes it's going to be great. Sometimes you're going to get 1 million views on the channel, and sometimes maybe someone doesn't watch the video at all. And all you have to do is get up and make the next video. And it just applies to everything. People say don't give up. I say don't stop fighting. That's it.
Thank you so much for that.
Yeah.
I attribute a huge part of my fight to your fight. Having somebody 6 years ahead of me in life who has always fought for the life they want.
Yeah.
And I keep fighting for the life I want.
Be your biggest advocate, and you are. You've turned into your best lawyer, your best your best PR firm. You can't export that stuff. You be your biggest advocate. Be the fighter for your life. Fight for the life that you want.
Thank you so much, Ramy, for talking to me today and
can't
talking
wait.
to everybody and sharing this experience. Yeah. If you could distill your legacy, your desire for an impact that you leave at today through this interview, but in life. At this, and I know that this will change over time.
Sure.
But as of now, as of today, December 23rd, 2024, if you could leave the planet, if you had to leave it tomorrow, with a legacy, an impact, what is it?
Well, hopefully the story on my life isn't written yet. It's not at least the last chapter. Hopefully I still, but I don't know. Maybe it is. Maybe I'm nearing the end of my chapter. We're not guaranteed anything. But I think for me, I know that maybe in 100 years or 150 years, depending on how long our nephews live, that maybe no one will remember my name. But at least if I can make life better for the people that I touch on a daily basis, if I can just be an additive to people's lives as I go through it, then I would have lived the life I wanted to live, even if it doesn't matter 200 years from now. I don't need it to.
Well,
I just need it to matter now.
You can rest assured that if the world takes you from us tomorrow, hope it does not,
that you have done so, at least in one person's life, in my life.
Thank you.
Which I
Yes.
will, carry with me all of the lessons I've learned from you and
Yeah.
through you, whether you explicitly told me them, whether it's this conversation today,
Yeah.
or just watching you
Yeah.
live your life. I really appreciate that a lot. After we shot the interview and the cameras were off, Ramy surprised me with this old frame that I made for him on his 22nd birthday when he was leaving for Florida to go to commercial aviation school. This is a photo of him in front of the private plane Cessna that he learned to fly on in Canada. And I have no recollection of making this frame or writing this card, but I'm going to share with you what I wrote because I think it still applies today. And I'm just so proud of Ramy, and I always have been, and I always will be, as he is proud of me. So here's what I wrote. Ramy, here goes the start of one of my essays, as you so enjoy calling them. I suppose this is the point where I say, look back on the past 22 years and realize what an amazing success you are and what an accomplishment your life has been. But the thing about that is, it's not just a bunch of words I'm throwing out on a page. You are so young, and yet I have seen you succeed so many times over. The picture on this frame represents so much more than just your career. It represents the pride you bring to this family and especially to me. This picture holds your strong and driven character and is the ultimate symbol for the next 22 years. Funny, he's almost 40, so it's been just about 20 years since I wrote this. You are flying to the top, quite literally, and nothing makes me happier than watching that happen. It gives me great joy, and I am just that proud to be calling you my brother. In your eyes, I see a motivation to be stronger and better, and I only hope that one day, maybe on my 22nd birthday, that you can be as truly proud of me as I am of you. Keep going the way I know you can. There are so many people who love you, Ramy, and are very sad to watch you leave. You can no doubt include me in that group. But as much as I will miss you, I know that even miles and miles away, you will still be making me proud, and I will have you in my heart. So by now, you're thinking, enough of this incessant rambling. Happy birthday, old man. Love, Corinne. What a time capsule. I'm so honored that he held this and kept this after all this time. I have long since passed 22. I'm 34. He's 39, going on 40. And somehow we feel so far from the kids that we were, and yet the exact same sentiment and feeling holds true today. So I'm so glad that you held on to this, Ramy, and thank you for your time.
Airplane mode.